house. Maybe I can buy this later if I cannot. Would definitely love to make this palette someday. I can try to replicate this color here. I love turquoise.
So after I decided to try making my own gouache at home, I quickly picked up my favorite pigments and some stuff from the kitchen, and I played around to see what would happen. I wanted to see if I can really make paints as opaque as gouache. If you have been following me on this channel, you would have known that I make watercolors at home, but then watercolors are known for their transparency. Well, it was so fun to be making a new recipe again. It was like being a scientist but with paints. After a bunch of tries, I finally made my own homemade gouache. Well, it's time I show you guys how I made gouache at home. Let's see the materials we might need to make gouache. Here I have a dry pigment. I'm going to use Patillo turquoise over here, a homemade gum Arabic binder.
Also, if you do not wish to make your own binder, these are available in shops. There's one by Schminke and there's also one by Winsor & Newton, which I cannot find here. Yeah.
Mommy.
Yeah.
Mommy.
We would need something to store the gouache in. This would be one of the most important ingredient here, calcium carbonate, so basically chalk, distilled water. I've poured some in and kept it a little handy. Some of the other optional ingredients are honey and glycerine. We would be adding some clove oil to preserve the gouache, palette knife to mix the gouache, and a couple of measuring spoons. First, start by taking the dry pigments. Here I'm using Patillo turquoise and I'm taking 1 tablespoon of it, and also 1 tablespoon of the watercolor binder that I have made before. So I will link down in the description the recipe of the watercolor binder. So this measurement would be the best place to start, like 1 tablespoon of pigment and 1 tablespoon of the binder, which is like a 1:1 ratio. Let's add 2 to 3 drops of clove oil to preserve the gouache. And my binder already has glycerine, so I won't be adding that. But if you're adding at this stage, you can add 1/8 teaspoon of glycerine and 1/8 teaspoon of honey if you wish to add. Alright, now let's mix it up with the palette knife, and we'll help the pigment disperse into the binders until we don't see any more dry pigment outside. This is the kind of paste kind of thing that we are looking for. At this point, you can play with the pigment and binder ratio to get this creamy consistency. Based on the texture of the paint, I decided to add a tad bit of honey to improve the smoothness and the texture. It gives a richness to the pigment, which also helps the gouache stay wet for a little longer. With a spoon, I would probably scoop way too much, so the honey sort of helped me smoothen the paint a little bit, so literally my palette knife is gliding through the paint, so that's a really good sign. So now we have this really smooth mixture of paint. So at this point, it's super transparent on this glass slab. So right now we have only made watercolors. We're gonna add the calcium carbonate. First we'll start with one. I'm gonna keep this aside. that the paint is still pretty transparent. The basic count is 1/4 of the pigment. That's how much calcium carbonate we'll be adding. Calcium carbonate would lighten up your pigment a little bit. At this point, you can go ahead. You can do a swatch test. But yes, it's a little transparent, if you can see here. So we'll add some more calcium carbonate. One more. This looks pretty good. I'm gonna mold it a little more. So about molding this, you can also use a candle stand or an acrylic brick that has a glass flat surface. Here I'm gonna use a molar.
You can also check out my other videos where I show how I make my own watercolors at home. Hope you have fun watching that too.
If you want to make the molding process a little easier, you can add some drops of water too. You can also stop at the previous step and move the paint to your pans or tubes. We're pretty much done here. A word of caution, if you don't add clove oil to your gouache, it might get moldy at some point of time. This is gonna be the next test. Yeah. And look how opaque it looks now. Just out of curiosity, I wanna try this on a black paper and see how it turns out. Oh my god, oh my god. How pretty is that? However, the best way to store it would be in some paint tubes. You can find empty paint tubes on Amazon. So if you get hold of that one, that would be convenient to use later sometime. But for the time being, this is what I have. Your handmade gouache is now ready to use. So now both the gouache paints have dried. I totally forgot to mention that you would also have to do a small test by rubbing a tissue paper or any paper over it, and if you see some pigment, you might have to add more gum arabic to bind the pigment. Just rub it slightly and you can see that it's a clear white paper, so the pigment is not really coming off the paper. So that's really important, that the pigment is bound completely to your paper. And the best part is I felt so proud of myself that I didn't just buy a gouache paint from the store, but rather made it myself at home. I hope you definitely try making some at home and use them in your own paintings. So happy creating. See you in the next one. Bye-bye.